Hello and welcome to our podcast today. So this is the third of our 5 podcasts that we've arranged to support Mental Health Awareness Week this week. So I'm Erica Burke, owner of the HR department Solihull, and we provide outsourced services to SMEs within the Solihull area. And I'm with Asha Berzon, owner of Mindability.
Hi.
Sorry?
Hi.
Who is there to help improve emotional well-being through training and therapy. So as I've said, we've all this week so far, we've looked at trauma and we've discussed domestic abuse. And today we're going to be covering alcohol abuse. Now, the subjects that we've chosen are things that haven't traditionally been part of the discussions that management have within the workplace. So we specifically chose these areas because we think they're important things for us to focus on as we think about well-being of staff in the workplace, particularly those returning to work after as the country reopens following the pandemic. So let's kick off then.
So I've got a question for you to begin with, Erica.
Okay.
So why are employers starting to pay attention to alcohol misuse now, do you think?
Well, say we've, drink has always been an issue, but I think given that we've spent most of the last year in, on furlough, in lockdown, jobs have been lost, people have, lost their lives. A number of people have turned to alcohol to help them cope to some extent with that. And in fact, DrinkAware did some research that said 2 in 5 people on furlough and 1/3 of parents with at least one child under 18 are drinking more alcohol now than before the lockdown. Alcohol consumption is starting earlier in the day, it's going on for longer periods of time. And, the reasons vary. We touched on loss of income, anxiety, boredom, lots of reasons why people are doing it. But the fact is that, in March last year, at one point, according to Kantar research, alcohol sales outstripped even food. I mean, that is horrifying to think about. Yeah. So, obviously colleagues now are coming back to work, possibly coming back from furlough. People may have formed habits which could now affect them in the workplace. So that's why now is really perhaps a good time to really start to talk about these things.
And I guess, in my previous work, we always had a policy and it was a zero tolerance on alcohol. Are there policies around it? I'm guessing there must be, but what do they tend to look like? Yeah,
most there have been, drug and alcohol or alcohol policies around for many, many years. So lots of employers do actually have them, but they've been mainly really about dealing with safety, the discipline aspect of it, more so than the well-being aspect. So lots of companies have them, lots don't equally, but lots of companies do have them. But I think there's been a sense of it being more of a disciplinary issue. So, for example, if people have, their job is, requires safety and so on, and somebody then is found to be abusing alcohol, or even had some alcohol, then it could be disciplinary. But much more, we're now thinking, actually, we need to have our policies being more about well-being. Now, disciplinary could still be an outcome, but actually it's about trying to recognise that people need some guidance. They need to know that the organisation they're working with isn't going to jump into punitive mode, that if you do say, look, I'm struggling with alcohol, that they're not going to leap into disciplinary, that they might actually try and find ways to help you.
And that's really important, isn't it? Because we both know from the conversations that we've been having that alcohol ultimately is just a coping strategy. You know, it's a symptom that something else is going on for that individual, whether that's that they're feeling particularly anxious, or that they're feeling stressed about something, or whatever it might be. The one that did not surprise me, but was a bit kind of like, oh, okay, was the one about the parents consuming alcohol much earlier in the day. And I know we're going to be looking at, we have, I should say, already looked at parental burnout. And I know it came up in that study as well, that parents are consuming more alcohol as well to help them manage such difficult times for them.
Yeah, sorry, I can't hear you very well.
Oh, I had a question and it went completely out my head there.
So did you know, when people have been drinking over this period of time, how long does it take them to form a habit?
So I know there's lots of stuff that goes around that it's an average of 28 days to form a habit. I think that's the thing, isn't it? Take it with a pinch of salt. You know, how long did it take you to learn to pass your test?
Yeah.
Do you get what I mean? You know,
Yeah.
there are people who are jamming it and it only took them one attempt, and there are other people, which I was one of, by the way, and there are other people who it's taken them 2 or 3 attempts. So, you know, creating a habit is very different depending on what we're talking about. But I also think it's really important that we make that distinction between having a habit where we're consuming alcohol and we can feel that there's an impact on the quality of our life, versus being dependent, where you're consuming large amounts, or maybe even not large amounts of alcohol, but you're relying on it to get yourself through the day, and then becomes that physical dependency. So again, I guess, you know, there is that distinction, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because as you said, for the jobs where they need it for the safety issues, to be completely teetotal, that makes, you know, I understand that there is that legal obligation, isn't there? There's that duty of care for the people that you're working for and with. But, you know, there's going to be those little subtleties now, isn't there? If people are coming into work with hangovers, you know, not just on possibly one day out of the month, but, you know, they're rocking up on a regular and frequent basis. And I guess that's what we're talking about, the policies, aren't we, really? And I guess in that situation, how would a manager broach the subject?
It's, you know, it is really difficult. You know, I've talked in the previous, you know, podcasts about the, you know, the challenges that managers face in terms of their whole style of management. Because, you know, if you know your staff, you can start to recognize when they're not doing things as well as they used to do. They're behaving differently. They could, you know, I mean, if they're really, somebody's really drinking up, and they might, you know, be able to smell it on them. But so for managers, I think one of the things is it's being able to say, you know, is everything okay? I've noticed that. That sort of language can, you know, open up the conversation, which would allow somebody to say, do you know what, actually, I've been really struggling. But, you know, it's really interesting because some of the things that, you know, we're talking about where somebody's work falls below standard, they're not the same, they're not concentrating. They could be other things. It may not be alcohol. So as a manager, of course, you can't jump to conclusions and suddenly say, well, it must be the drink. But just open up the dialogue that says, you know, is everything okay with you? I've noticed that. And if you're in a small team or a small company, it's probably more chance that you know that individual much more closely than you might in a massive company. So it's even more straightforward, I would imagine, for you to be able to have that sort of dialogue. But what's interesting for me, Asha, is, which I, you know, hope you can help me with, you know, I know that when, for many a time, you know, I look forward to getting home and, you know, having my first glass of wine. So Why does alcohol just feel so good?
And that's a really interesting thing, because you're absolutely right. When we've had a really long or tough day at work, we know that what alcohol does is chemical product at the end of the day that we're putting into our body. And what it does is it interferes with our natural chemical balances. So what we initially get when you first have that glass of wine and you're pouring it, you're getting that lovely, oh, I can't wait to taste it. I can't wait,
Oh yeah.
that feeling of relaxation. So actually, even that, even the thinking, even the anticipation of it, you're getting that wonderful dopamine boost. You're getting that feeling of dopamine. So dopamine is our reward neurochemical.
Yeah.
And then you consume it. And so when you're consuming that initial phase of alcohol consumption, you will get dopamine, serotonin, and then you get GABA as well, which is another neurochemical which slows you down. It's the, you know, that feeling you get when you take that first sip and you think, oh, that's lovely, that's so
Oh
lovely.
yeah.
That's dopamine and serotonin. Then what happens is the GABA production also increases, and that's what makes us feel quite relaxed. We get that slurred speech. Our reflexes are much slower. And then also what happens is the alcohol will start to attach itself to our sleep receptors. And so the actual neurochemical that's responsible for sleep can't, because the alcohol receptors are attached to it. And so as a result of that, we become comatose. So we think we're sleeping, but we're actually not sleeping. Now, going back to what we were saying earlier, alcohol misuse, particularly I'm talking about, so where you feel that there's been no impact on your quality of life or your relationships or your ability to carry out work. So we're talking specifically about alcohol misuse.
Yeah.
When you're, I've forgotten where I was going to go with that. Yeah, so if you're misusing alcohol on a frequent basis, you're not getting the sleep, proper sleep. So you're not getting REM sleep. And so what happens is if we're going back to our conversation earlier and we're saying that actually alcohol is a coping strategy because it's a sign, it's a symptom, it's a response to things not being great, then those problems are still going to continue to be there. And actually you then haven't had that REM sleep that's allowed you to process your emotions or those events of the day. So, you know, we talk about the bucket, don't we, in first aid training, where we say, you know, everybody has a bucket or a stress container, and we fill up this bucket as the day goes on. Well, not only is it important to protect your bucket, so being very mindful about what you're putting into it, and what you can do to take stuff out of it, but also naturally, REM sleep is our way of emptying that bucket. Okay.
Right.
So if you're using alcohol to help you cope with the fact that your kids are driving you up the wall and you've really struggled with homeschooling, alcohol isn't actually going to do anything for you. If anything, it's going to make you feel worse because your bucket isn't empty. So when you wake up in the morning and you're faced with the same situation, your bucket's going to overflow.
Right.
Makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, do you help clients address their alcohol use? I mean, is that what you deal with?
Yeah, very much so. I've had lots of clients, as you can imagine, over this last year who have identified that they believe that they're drinking too much. I'm not, again, like I said, I don't focus on the volume. What I'm more concerned about or more interested in is that they feel that A, they're drinking too much for their liking, and that they feel that it's having an impact either on their quality of life or their relationships. But I am mindful that if I do speak to somebody and they sometimes they do tell me the volumes that they're speaking, and because of my past training, I'm kind of mindful that this sounds more like a dependency and it's not for me. I can't support them. Because the other thing to be aware of is when we talk about alcohol dependency, abruptly stopping consuming alcohol can actually be really, really detrimental. So it has to be monitored and done medically. So it has to be done by the GP. So usually one of the things I say to my clients is, you know, what kinds of things would you like to change in terms of your alcohol use? And usually that gives me an idea, and I will tell them that they need to maybe go to their GP. But there is actually a online assessment on Drink Aware that we'll put in the link. So ultimately, when I'm working with my clients, my strategy, my approach is very much about helping them empty the bucket. If they empty the bucket, they're less likely to use alcohol to help them manage those tricky situations because the bucket is stronger.
So is there a point at which, because obviously, you know, if you're having, you know, 1 drink a day, for example, is that too much? Is it a coping strategy at that point, or is it just pleasure at that point? It's difficult to kind of work out, isn't it?
And that's why I never ask the question, how much are you drinking? My question is, do you think you're drinking too much?
Right.
Now, I'm not a big drinker, so I don't drink that often. So if I'm drinking every night, that for me feels like it's too much.
Right.
That's the difference. And also it's about giving yourself that space to understand why am I drinking?
Yeah.
Am I drinking because the kids have driven me up the wall and I just feel like I just need that downtime? And doing that every night. And the other thing to be aware of is alcohol triggers dopamine, like I said, in our system. And what then happens is if we're doing it on a frequent basis, eventually we become desensitized to the amount of dopamine that we're experiencing.
Yeah.
So then there is that craving to want to have more dopamine. So that's when we start to potentially increase how much alcohol we're using.
Wow.
Yeah, so, you know, it's just to be mindful of that.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. It's really helpful.
In terms of if somebody, say, for example, rang you up and said, Erica, I'm kind of struggling with this, what more can HR do?
I think, you know, it is a difficult one because over the years, you know, it isn't a subject that routinely in HR we talk about. You know, there have been the odd instances where somebody, you know, has come to tell us that such and such a person has smells of alcohol. We look into it. They might be disciplined. You know, that's very much where things sat. But increasingly, you know, we are starting to be in the well-being space, and, you know, have been for a few years, but we haven't been as proactive as perhaps we could be. So I think that what HR need to do much more of, and, you know, is to learn a bit more about these things, to look at the areas where they can refer staff to, so that they can give managers some support, because, you know, we're not experts, managers aren't experts, you know, we need policies in place, we need to understand that lots of people go through challenges within their lives who are in the workplace, and we need to know that if somebody is experiencing that they can, you know, if we've got a policy, they know that we have that, they can come and talk to somebody and let them know. And that individual, who might be the manager, who may be somebody in HR, who may be a colleague, would be able to steer them in the right direction to get some support. But, you know, on a practical level, it may be that somebody needs to be able to work a bit flexibly. You know, if they really have got a serious problem, then, and they need to attend meetings or to you know, to get medical assistance, that we can give them the time off, you know, to allow them to you know, access those appointments. You know, it's little things sometimes that we can do. But, you know, what I would say is that, you know, a disciplinary might be an outcome, because obviously if somebody's job, you know, has safety implications, for example, then it is not, you know, it may not be appropriate for them to continue in employment. And it may be fair to dismiss somebody. But what I think people need also to understand is, as you said earlier on, you know, drinking may be hiding some other ailment. And if somebody has an underlying medical condition, for example, depression or anxiety, and that is a disability, then although you might be able to dismiss somebody, if you've not followed a fair process in dismissing them, i.e., if the underlying issue is to do with a disability and you haven't sought to put in any reasonable adjustments, then that dismissal could ultimately become unfair. So, you know, it is about understanding a bit more. It is about, you know, treating each case on its merit before you leap into action. But having a policy with all these things and providing training for managers and HR is always a great start.
And I think one of the things I think that's become really apparent for me as well is understanding that managers aren't a separate entity, they're part of the organisation, and so
absolutely
policies apply to them as much as we're talking about the staff that they manage as well. And I think particularly I'm quite mindful, because that's when I experienced my workout, my stress, my work-related stress period. That's when I had my burnout, basically, when I was a manager. The pressure I was under was immense. I didn't misuse alcohol, but I certainly wasn't in a good place. And so, you know, again, just to kind of remind ourselves that we're educating the whole organisation.
Yeah, absolutely. Managers are just, you know, everybody is, you know, in the workplace is human, and we've all got different stresses. You know, there is, you know, we've said before, there's a huge amount of pressure on managers, and it isn't, perhaps, you know, one of the things is about, you know, what are the skills that we want managers to have, and we want them to have, you know, some of those, you know, a bit more empathy, to think in different ways about how they manage and get the most out of their staff, and well-being and concern for employee well-being is really important, because that will, you know, if your employees have been able to be productive and you're not having to dismiss them, and you're not having to then hire and retrain and all of the rest of it, that's going to save money, and quite a lot of it. So it's a great investment, you know, for economically for a business, but also, you know, as, you know, a good citizen type approach as well.
Absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. And I was just saying that seems to be the common theme of everything that we've talked about.
I know. It's about mental health awareness and well-being, isn't it?
Because we're being consistent, and we know that's what it's about, isn't it? Being good humans and individuals, and taking our social responsibility seriously.
Yeah, you've gone very quiet, by the way.
Oh, have I? Oh dear, sorry. So we hope that this has given you some food for thought, really, and giving you some ideas about creating that right work environment so that you can support your colleagues with alcohol misuse or any issues that they do present to you. What we will do is, when we upload this, we will also put some links in for you. So if you do need some support, including Erica's details, so if you need some support about creating those particular policies or seeking some advice and guidance, then Erica's details will be there. And if you or anyone you know might be struggling with that habit formation of consuming alcohol, and you feel that it's something you want to break out of, then please do get in touch with me, and we can book some one-to-one sessions. I think that's everything, Erica.
Yeah, I think we've covered everything. It's you know, as ever, it's been good to talk. So yeah, useful, and I've learned something today as well. So Asha, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.